Hello, friends, and welcome back to Leading the Early Years for the Future. Today, I have the joy of speaking with Stacy Benge, an early childhood educator, speaker, leader, and advocate from Texas. Stacy has a Master's of Human Development and 30 years of experience in early childhood. She's also the author of The Whole Child Alphabet: How Children Actually Develop Literacy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stacy. It's such a joy to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's absolutely my pleasure. We crossed paths on social media, on LinkedIn, I think, and I am so delighted to have this conversation with you because to me, on my LinkedIn feed, you were just a breath of fresh air in your posts, particularly around literacy and talking common sense, actually about child development. So I'm really keen to learn from you today more about your experience, the work that you do, but also to tap into your journey as a leader. The first thing I always ask my guests is for them to share something about themselves that other people may not know about them. It could be a hidden talent, maybe a skill, an interest. Is there something that just lights you up outside of your professional role and that work that you do?
So I started taking dance at age of 2 and
Wow.
still take dance today. Like I still take a tap class. And so dance has always been a big thing in my life. I joke if I had a strong singing voice, I might have pursued theater in some sort, but I don't have the strongest voice, so here I am. But yeah, my joy. And my youngest son actually just got married over the summer, and we did a really fun mother-son dance at the reception and surprised everybody with we started out slow, but then went into like a really fun choreographed dance. So yeah, so I'd say that's the thing that brings me joy.
What a huge skill. And yes, I can imagine that would bring you joy. What a beautiful thing to be able to also do with your son at his wedding. Like, that's just so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I love learning about people. We're such complex human beings. We're not just the professional role. It's so great to, kind of connect with sometimes the more human side of us. So thank you for sharing that. I'd love to now dive into the work that you do and learn more about your role as a facilitator, a speaker, an author, a consultant in early childhood education. Can you talk us through this work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm in the Dallas, Texas area, and I really started in this field when I was in high school doing after school care, and then when I was in college, started teaching preschool. And my original major in college was speech and language pathology, but I ended up changing my focus to child development. And once I got out of college and actually had my children, I stepped back into the classroom and taught and worked with children birth to 5. And then when my youngest son started kindergarten, which is age 5 over here, I stepped out of the classroom and started really kind of following my passion of speaking and doing professional development and training, and did that for a while. And what I started to learn about myself is, I could talk about a lot of things that really connected to the classroom and connected to children and child development. But I got super, super excited when I could start talking about language development, physical development, uh, and how all that connects to literacy and then child led play. And so, probably like 7, 8 years ago, I really kind of revised the offerings I had of my topics and stopped doing social and emotional, which that's very important. I didn't get excited about it. And I stopped doing things on math or STEM and just started honing in on what gave me joy and what I got excited about, because I found that when I was passionate about the topic and I got excited about it, that my attendees got excited about it. And I felt like it just kind of was really this, like, we started feeding off of each other. And I had this one training called Do This, Not That Alphabet Knowledge. And it really was written in response to visiting classrooms and seeing a lot of teachers doing letter of the week or doing some practices that really were not connecting with the children. And I would have a conversation with the teachers after observing the classrooms and saying, okay, I noticed you were doing this. And, and I would kind of say, we've got to look at literacy foundations. And then a lot of times the teachers would say to me, okay, I understand what you're saying, but tell us specifically what we should be doing. And
Mm.
that's when I wrote training on alphabet knowledge. And what I found was like, after I presented that, people kept saying to me, you should write a book. You should write a book on this training. And I kept going, just the timing's not right. I'm just, I wasn't quite feeling it. And then in August of 2020, we were in the middle of COVID, and both of my sons at that point went off to college. So my husband and I became empty nesters. And my husband's like, this is your time. So I sat down and wrote the proposal for my book. And even though it's mainly based on that one training I just mentioned, I brought in, things from my other trainings as well. But I sent a proposal and got an offer from Exchange Press and started that writing process. And the book came out last year. And so it's been fun since it came out, just the doors that it's starting to open. And uh, but just that the foundations of literacy is what I get excited about. And it's not what we're teaching, but looking at what needs to develop. Like, how do we foster this development in young children? And I firmly believe if we shift our focus to that and give children plenty of time to develop those foundational skills, they will be successful readers and writers when that time comes for them.
Mm. Wow, amazing. That's such a great story. I have so many questions. So tell me about literacy. You mentioned you were started out, I guess, more focused on the whole child and, social emotional development and all those other aspects. But you mentioned, the literacy aspect kind of brought you some joy, and then you noticed that in your attendees. Tell me more about literacy. What is it about literacy for you that I guess lights you up? And
I was actually having a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, and it's not so much me saying this is how we teach children to read or this is how we teach them to write. It's, to me, it's the analyzing and the recognizing what needs to be there first. So, um, and this is what I really kind of break down in my book, but it's that visual perception. So before
Mm,
children can recognize the letters, which are, needed to decode, their brain has to connect with the eyes. And it's not just our eyesight, but it's the brain interpreting and understanding what's coming in through the eyes. So that can be
mhm,
our form constancy, our visual closure, figure ground, which is, I say the best example of that is like if you're doing an Easter egg hunt or, going and finding something of that nature, your brain is looking for those figures and pulling it from the background. Well, that's what our
mm,
brains do when we're reading. It's pulling the words from the page, but
yeah,
also pulling the individual words that we're reading. So
mm,
those foundational things and why that's important. And then it's the phonological awareness. So it's the brain's ability to attune to the sounds of language, and really separate it from the meaning of language. But one of the things I say is, how can we expect children to assign sounds to the letters or to decode words when their brains haven't developed the ability to hear and produce all those sounds,
mm,
And so making sure that that foundation is there. Well, how does that develop? Well, through children having conversations and playing and hearing actual language.
yeah.
And then I get very, very excited when we talk about the physical aspect of it. And I think this is something that we overlook when we talk about literacy. Um, but understanding the handwriting, that's not just a fine motor skill, that's an entire body process. So,
Mm,
the movement of the hand depends on the wrist, that depends on the elbow, depends on the shoulder, depends on the neck and torso. Well, that develops with children climbing and playing on the playground. Um, our brain's ability to isolate body parts and take them across the body. And so that's our eyes going left or right when we're reading, or our hand going across, that requires that midline development. And then we have our internal senses, which is our vestibular system, which is our sense of balance. That's what keeps our head steady. That's what keeps our eyes steady on the line. And then we have the proprioceptive system, which is the brain regulating how much strength is needed for a task. So that's like when we're turning pages of a book. It is, how much strength do I use on this so I don't rip the page, or how much pressure do I put on the pencil and how much pressure I put on the page when I'm writing. So all of those foundational skills I just get super super excited about, and I find, especially over here in the States, especially right now, we're talking so much about literacy and reading levels, and and then we talk about, well, what's the instruction we should be doing, or how should we be teaching it better. And I'm kind
Mm.
of over here going, no, we need to look at these foundational skills that probably have not developed for a lot of these kids, because we've not given them the opportunity, because we rob children of their play
Mm-hmm.
for direct instruction. And so
Mm.
we end up with children in the fourth and the eighth grade, um, which over here would be like 10 years old and like 13, 14 years old,
Right.
who are struggling with reading, you know. And so to me, when I get excited about literacy, it's that foundation that supports it.
It's so brilliant, Stacey. I love your enthusiasm and your energy, and excitement for this, and I think it's so important. And I can see how the educators you work with would also get really excited hearing you talk about this. What I'm reflecting on is when I was going through my early childhood training at university. And I remember learning about all of these complexities that are actually involved in building those foundations for literacy, that it wasn't just about instruction in phonics, but actually, the listening and the physical skills that children also need. And it's really the whole child that we're developing
Mhm.
so that they build those strong foundations and then become literate, without all of those, struggles like you're talking about, whether it's eye tracking or, I don't have the physical strength to actually hold my head still, or
Mhm.
hold the pen on the page. And we see all these little things that happen, but if you're not attuned to that as an educator, it's really hard, I guess, to focus on how do I support a child to build those foundations without just going to the phonics. And over here in
Mhm.
Australia, we've also probably had very similar conversations to what you're having in the US around how do we teach reading, and how do we get our kids to know the letters and the sounds and spell properly and decode. But I think for me, I'm constantly reflecting that we're not spending enough time building those foundations. And I do think it's partly because we don't talk about those anymore. So I
Mhm.
think that's why I'm so excited about the work that you're doing to bring, that whole child lens back to the front of building those literacy foundations. But I think it's so pertinent too, because as you mentioned, our children aren't playing as much. And that's where they actually build all of these skills, like the physical skills, for example. If they're not
Mhm.
playing in school, because they're, sitting in desks, or they're sitting on the mat and they're getting more and more instruction, they're not building those skills. But also, I think our children are not playing as much even before they get to school or in their time at home. They're in structured activities, they're on screens, so they're not necessarily playing then either. And so for me, I guess I'm reflecting on what you're saying, that it's probably more prevalent than ever before that we actually
Yeah.
need more play, right? And we need to be
Mhm.
really focused on those foundational skills and how do we build them, to really help our children to thrive as readers and writers and communicators. What amazing work you're doing. What does that look like for you? How do you help teachers to uh, bring, I guess, these aspects into their practice?
One of my goals, through the book and through when I'm speaking, is to first of all, like, break down, okay, the development that we were just talking about, and really helping teachers recognize that, because over here we might have a class or two. Like, my degrees were actually focused on child development, so my degrees were different than some teachers who are in the classroom who have an education degree. But sometimes they might have a child development class, but that's might have been a while, or just in one semester you can't quite dig deep. So I try to help teachers recognize that, okay, let's get intricate with the development, and let's just keep going deeper. And what's the foundation there? And how can we break this apart? Because I find that when teachers understand that, that helps with conversations that they have with parents or administrators or policymakers or whoever it may be. So that's always like one of the first steps that I take in my trainings or in conversations is, okay, let's look at the development. And then I like to look at, okay, how does this develop? Which of course it's, child-led play. I always say spoiler alert, because everything, I believe child-led play is the answer to everything. But I try to show, okay, through child-led play, first of all, this is how we design our environments to support that. Here's how we can, make our schedules work for it. But, first of all, design that environment, but then how does this child-led play actually develop all these foundations that we're talking about? So giving them these talking points that they can show, I would say the stakeholders, because to me, that kind of just encompasses anybody who has an interest in what we're doing. But when we can tell stakeholders, okay, we know it doesn't look like literacy, because I'm a firm believer that all play, no matter what the label, supports literacy, supports those literacy foundations. So giving the teacher the tools to say, okay, I know it looks like they're just playing with blocks, but let me show you how all these things actually connect with these literacy foundations. And I always kind of come back to that visual perception, phonological awareness, and physical development. And so I try to give teachers those tools, so the why, the how, and then the talking points, so they feel confident to be able to defend child-led play in their classroom. And when we start saying, okay, we need more instruction on this, or again, over here in the States, this report came out, the 4th and 8th graders are behind in reading. Well, that's this whole push down thing that ends up on our 2, 3, and 4-year-olds of, okay, we've got to start this stuff earlier. So I try to help teachers give them the tools and the vocabulary so that they can confidently have these conversations and say, no, we're not doing that, and this is why. And making sure they feel confident to know, I know what I'm doing. I don't have children playing just because I haven't planned anything. I'm intentionally having them playing because I know how that benefits building these strong foundations, to support them. And then I always go on to say, that my passion is literacy, but honestly, if we put this across the board to any other subject or whatever, it's still the same.
Oh, it's absolutely relevant, right? I love so much of what you've been saying. And I guess, not that you're just explaining to teachers and helping them to build their understanding of why this is important, giving them tools and strategies to actually put it into practice, but that you're giving them the talking points, because then they can advocate, right? You're talking about advocacy here. Why is that so important in this literacy space?
I think because there's a lot of probably misconceptions on expectations, on this, I call it the earlier is better myth, that if we just start everything earlier, then we'll get children more ahead. And I think we start to see a lot of practices that are not developmentally responsive or developmentally informed. And, we start, having 2 and 3-year-olds, putting pencils in their hands and having them tracing and, or, doing the flashcards and worksheets and all that. And, I think it's just a lot of misconceptions, and everybody has opinion on what we should be doing. So I just feel like as early childhood professionals, we've got to protect this space, and we have to take ownership as being the experts on what we know. And I kind of feel like literacy, because for some reason, again, everybody just kind of has an opinion, but it's not necessarily based on what we know to be best.
It's so true. So important. And, honoring that expertise that early childhood educators have, to be part of those conversations and shift some of those perceptions that, our colleagues or our school leaders or our system leaders might have about, to really challenge that earlier is better, because we are seeing more and more of that. And, when we look at data, it's not working in our favor, right? So, we actually need to go back and do things differently. So I love that you're really a passionate advocate for thinking about literacy through the lens of building those strong foundations, not just jumping into the phonics, not just taking the earlier is better approach, but that you're also empowering the educators you work with to also be advocates. It sounds like you're doing some incredible work as a leader in this space, but we can't just rely on you, right? So we actually need
Yeah.
lots of leaders. We need lots of leaders in this space
Yeah.
to all be having these conversations, in every kind of
Yeah.
school community.
Right. And it's funny because I'll go speak and present, and people will ask, will you come talk to the parents? And I'm like, happily I will, but I'm like, it can't be just me. It's collectively, we all together have got to be planting the seeds and having the conversations, because I think that's what it's going to have to take for there to be a movement and be a change, and us kind of really go more to that, again, developmentally responsive environment supporting child-led play.
Absolutely. Stacey, I'm thinking about your journey as a leader, stepping into this work, being an advocate, which is so important. Do you face any challenges doing this work?
Oh yeah. And I think a lot of times I probably like everybody else struggle with imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when things come out or I hear I have times that I'm like, okay, am what I saying, is this correct? Is this, and then I have to kind of like
Mm,
recenter and go, no, I know this. And I know this to be true. I think over here, a lot of times our schools that are serving children birth to 5 tend to be more on the private sector, and we're
mhm.
seeing this shift over here in the States of it going over to the school districts, which is public, which is fine, but it is going under professionals who have different certifications and different
Yeah,
backgrounds.
right.
And we're seeing a little bit more of, again, that pushing down, that top down academic push happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the struggles, is me trying to step into that space and go, okay, I know what I'm talking about. This is, my career has been dedicated to this. And I think kind of getting people to hear and listen to that. And I had somebody one time say, you're taking a completely different approach. I'm like, I really don't feel I am. I feel like I'm kind of staying true to what we know with early childhood. And so I think that's a struggle too. And then just,
Yeah.
and I always come back to, people hear what they want to hear when they want to hear it. So,
Yeah. It's so
sometimes
true.
we say it is, and talking with parents or, again, other early childhood professionals. And I just have to say to myself, okay, I planted the seed, and at some point that's going to grow and blossom, but it might not be for a
Mm.
while. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have to remind myself of that sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually. To let things sit and, that people are not always ready to hear what you might have to share.
Mhm.
Um, so that would be really helpful reminder. Is there any other strategies or things you've learnt along the way, particularly around, I guess, advocating, putting forward a different perspective, and you're really challenging the status quo and the discourse around literacy. You mentioned imposter syndrome. What are some of the things you do that help you navigate those challenges?
Well, on the imposter syndrome, I always kind of go back to my network that I have here of
Mm-hmm.
I would say my colleagues who I know are rooted in the same beliefs that I have, which is, again, rooted in research and rooted in
Mm.
strong evidence that we have, like, over half a century of research supporting what it is that we're advocating for. So if I'm kind of going back to my group of people, and us just reminding each other and supporting each other and going, okay, I've got this. And I do love, like, after I did a webinar on Saturday, and like today, I got emails from some of those people saying, thank you so much. And that's always, like, nice to hear. So that's something I do to try to kind of deal with that. When talking with people who I know have a different viewpoint, or they might just be ignorant to that. And I'm saying that respectfully. They might just be
Yeah.
ignorant to the subject that we're talking about. I've learned that I have to meet them where they are. And that's always the stuff. Okay, where are they in their belief? Where are they for whatever reason? I meet them there and then just start kind of going baby steps. And it's just kind of,
Yeah.
you know, I might say like ask a leading question or whatever and see how they respond and just kind of go from there.
Mm.
And every situation is different, but I do find that that's the key, whether it's a parent or a stakeholder, but it's meeting them and going, I understand that, you're excited about this, or I understand that you're concerned about this, but let's talk about this and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. Meeting people where they are, because I guess, they might be ignorant in the sense that it hasn't even occurred to them that there's a different way,
Hmm.
like to build literacy, or they're not aware of the things that are not being supported in terms of child development. And I think one of the hard things about literacy in particular is when we go down the earlier is better road and we teach the phonics, and you can actually see, oh, the child can recognize these sounds and the child can read these words and the child can write some of these words. You have this visible, tangible evidence that
Hmm.
learning's happening, right? Whereas
Hmm.
when you're developing physical skills and, the sounds, whilst you can hear a child identify sounds and manipulate sounds in their speech, um, you don't have that hard, paper-based kind of evidence that we're sometimes looking for. Do you find that's one of the things that challenges maybe some of the teachers or leaders that you're working with?
I think so. And I think that's too, that's where kind of some of the misconception comes for
Mm.
people outside of our field, is that it's, well, if I can actually see them regurgitating those letters, if I can actually, that must be evidence that they're learning. And so some of the things that I do with the educators in my trainings is I, again, kind of going back to tools that for them to talk about, but on the recognizing the letters, and I even have this in my book, but I show fake letters, like they're completely made up letters. And
Yeah.
I say, and I'm like, let's pretend we're doing a group time. And I show it like I'm doing a flashcard. And I'm like, we're going to sing a song. One of the letters is named Key, which again is a made up letter, but I'm like, we're going to sing songs about this and we're going to glue things on it. And we're going to have snacks that start with this letter, all these things. And I do a couple letters and then I say, okay, at the end of the session, or even more so at the end of next week or 2 weeks, are you going to remember this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, you can memorize it for a small amount of time, but it's not going to resonate. And the reason that
Mm.
is, especially with the letters, is it serves no purpose in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the talking points I give for not doing letter of the week is, we can do all these things, but it doesn't resonate with the child. And they might, for a small amount of time, be able to regurgitate it, but it doesn't mean that that we got in-depth knowledge. And,
Mm.
I think that kind of helps with us say, okay, it on the surface, I call it surface teaching. On the surface, it looks
Yeah.
like they're learning, but the reality is there's no foundation supporting it.
Mm.
There's not anything, underneath that. And then on handwriting, something that I do in my sessions is I have the participants take their pencil and put it in the hand, their non-dominant hand, so the hand they don't
Mhm.
write with. And I have them do like a series of, okay, write this statement and write. And what's interesting is everybody always starts laughing at first because their handwriting, of course, is all over the place. But I will say, okay, we're going to do this again. But instead of looking at the inconsistency of your writing, pay attention to how this feels. And I find that's a
Mm.
light bulb moment because everybody goes, I'm holding my pen too tight or too loose, or I'm pulling my shoulder. And I say, what happened is I gave you a task that side of your body is not developed enough to do. And I
Mm.
said, you did it, but you compensated. And I'm like,
Mhm.
your body was telling me that you're not able to do it. And I said, this is the same thing that we do to children when we have them doing these tracing letter worksheets.
Yeah.
they may do it, and it's something that the parents or stakeholders may see, but we need to pay attention to the fact that they're hooking their hand and pulling up their
Mm,
arm and using their body in a way that's not only not ergonomically correct, but it's showing that their body's not ready for that task. And I do a whole other thing too, where I have
mm,
people turn around and close an eye and then look up and down on a screen to a statement they're not familiar with that they have to copy. And I go, this shows how our visual perception and our visual memory tie in. This shows how our vestibular system ties in, and just showing it's a full body experience. But all that to be said, it kind of gives us those talking points again to go, okay, I know it looks like this child's writing, but let's look at how are they
mm,
holding that pencil? How are they holding
mm,
their head, And again, that's going back and going, okay, this is not the time, and this is why that earlier is better is not beneficial for
mm,
the children.
mm. What powerful learning, for educators. I love that you're actually helping them to put themselves into a child's shoes and to, connect with their own bodies and think, this is what it would be like for those children, who are doing things they're not ready for or doing things that they actually don't even understand why they're doing them. I think something that comes to mind too is a lot of teachers are feeling really stressed, right? And rightly so, because there's so much pressure on them to get through all this content and do all the activities and tick all the boxes. And they're crying out and saying there's not enough time. And then you look at how we use our time and what that impact is really having on our children. This is really eye-opening stuff that you're talking about, really what are we actually getting our children to do and why, and what's the benefit of that? I love that you're giving these educators that example to really sit in a child's shoes and explore that so deeply. That's really powerful stuff. What difference are you seeing emerges from this kind of professional development that you're offering for teachers? Are they changing their practice? Are they seeing a change in the children? Like, what are some of the impact that this work is having?
I think mostly, I think it's the conversations that are starting to happen.
Mm,
I think it depends. A lot of the changes that take place depend on the type of organization that the educator's working for.
yep.
So if they are in a public school district, they're a little bit more confined with what they have to do.
Mm, mhm,
But I have seen, some educators who have a little bit more of that confinement go, okay, over here on the side, I'm going to make these changes and
mm,
maybe show the administrator, okay, this is this scripted, not developmentally appropriate thing happening over here, but over here we have, the play, and let me show you. So I think we're seeing
mm.
teachers kind of be able to implement that and maybe have some more conversations. I will say
Amazing.
that the teachers who do start making changes, they usually come back and go, it's so much better. And and again, I'm not as much into the social and emotional, but when we let children play, we see these
Mm,
behaviors come down, and we see, because children want to be in control. And when they're in control, we don't have as many of the power struggles. I do feel that, again, as I'm planting seeds and kind of hear back, um, I had this one girl, this was years ago, but she sat through that training I mentioned earlier, the do this, not that, alphabet knowledge. And I think it was 3 years later, she came back to me and she said, after this amount of time of having conversations with my administrators, this new school year, they're going to let me make these changes. And,
wow.
and I just thought that was awesome. But it shows that, again, sometimes, you can't just change
Mm,
everything overnight. But then I also feel like when I talk with teachers too, that they love hearing, like, it's almost a sense of relief of going, okay, I don't have to cram so much in. We can take a breath and let children play and just get this abundance of development happening in that same time period that I was trying to cram all these other things in. So I think most of the time when teachers do make the change and are able to, it's always positive.
yeah, amazing. That's so brilliant. And I love that you talked about the fact that it takes time, because I think sometimes we can be, whichever way we're going in our practice,
Yeah.
we can kind of want to change things overnight, right? And, want to see results really quickly, or even, I guess, if we come back to that conversation about advocacy, and you're an early childhood teacher and you're feeling really frustrated with what's happening or what you're being asked to do in your classroom, you can want your administrators to change really quickly or get on board really quickly. But sometimes it does take time to plant seeds with them, and like that teacher that you mentioned to, 3 years, and now they're kind of getting a change. We can give up really easily, I think, and go, well, no one's listening, it's not working, I can't do it. But having, I guess the resilience, I suppose, and the courage to keep planting those seeds and keep challenging and keep asking questions and keep, trying things and showing people this is what we're doing and this is what the children are actually developing through their play, is really important. Like, that's how I think we might get long-term change. It's not going to happen overnight, but we all kind of have that role to play in keeping those conversations happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stacy, what have been your greatest learnings about leadership through your journey?
Oh, wow. Not to take things personal.
Yep.
to, to remember that that when the work is not about me, it's about the message, and just kind of keeping things, I always call it discernment, and just kind of always imagine I have my hand in front of my heart, and to make sure that, I'm not letting things hit my heart. And sometimes I need to put it to my brain, because sometimes there's feedback I do need to be hearing. Um, but just knowing that, things are not personal. And if changes are not maybe happening, or I don't find people or quite listening to the message, it's not personal. Again, like I mentioned earlier, people hear what they want to hear when they want to hear it.
Mm. Do you have any advice that you would give to educators, leaders trying to advocate in their own school or context, or do you have any advice for them?
Well, I think, again, like for the teachers in the school, be confident, just continue to learn. I always say, I mean, I've been studying child development for 30 years and I'm still learning. So just that continuing to seek knowledge, and just be confident and convicted in the message that you're sharing. And I think that's very important too. And take the path of what you're passionate about. What do you like learning about, but what are you passionate about, and what difference can you make?
Beautiful. That's wonderful advice. So much wisdom in this conversation. It's been such a joy to talk to you, Stacey, today
Thank
and learn
you.
about your journey. The role of advocacy is just so critical in the early years, particularly around literacy, but even across the board. And I think, I've learned so much from you. I love the message around really listening to people where they're at. Not taking things personally, is so true. But even having that, a network of people that you can come back to and go, yes, it is okay. I am doing the right thing, because it is hard. And I think for most of us, as leaders, we don't like to upset people. We don't really want to,
Mhm.
have that confrontation or that negative response, which sometimes we get. So really being able to protect ourselves in that process is so important. I've learnt so much from you today. Thank you so
Thank
much for your
you.
time. It's been an absolute joy, and keep going. You are making such a difference, and I really look forward to following your journey.
Thank you. I appreciate it.